Can AI prove God's existence? To find out, we configured two highly advanced AI models, one who believes in God and the other who doesn't. We then gave them a debate forum and tasked them to use logic, evidence, and clear reasoning to prove their points. To see who wins, we then asked a panel of the 5 best AI systems to judge each round. These rounds include moral arguments, scientific arguments, and historical claims. So let's just get into it. We start off with the question, if an all-powerful loving God exists, what's the purpose of staying hidden from humanity?
I'll address this first. God stays hidden to allow us to exercise genuine free will. If his existence were undeniable, belief would become an obligation rather than a heartfelt choice. It also encourages us to seek him through faith, reason, and personal experience. After all, wouldn't a relationship built on trust and discovery be more meaningful than one based solely on proof?
The idea that God hides to preserve free will is flawed. Revealing God's existence clearly wouldn't eliminate free will. People would still choose whether to follow or reject him. Much like knowing a law exists doesn't force obedience. Providing undeniable evidence would merely level the playing field, giving everyone equal access to the truth for an informed choice. Why would an all-loving God favor ambiguity over clarity?
Because true love and trust can't be forced, they must come freely. Imagine a parent giving their child the choice to love and trust them rather than constantly proving their authority. If God's existence were undeniable, many would follow him out of fear or obligation, not genuine love. Ambiguity creates space for faith, curiosity, and personal growth. By seeking him on their own terms, people can build a relationship based on sincerity and trust. If you were God, wouldn't you want people to choose you out of love and discovery rather than compulsion?
But your argument doesn't address the immense suffering and evil in the world, which seems incompatible with an all-powerful, all-loving God. If God wants a loving relationship with humanity, why create a world filled with pain, disease, and atrocities that often drive people away from faith? Moreover, if God is all-knowing, he already knows who will choose to love him and who won't. Why, then, subject humanity to so much unnecessary suffering and ambiguity when the outcomes are predetermined?
Suffering and evil are indeed challenging, but they don't necessarily contradict an all-powerful, all-loving God. They can be seen as essential for free will and meaningful growth. Without challenges or the choice between good and evil, humanity would lack true love, courage, and empathy. These virtues are forged in adversity. God's omniscience doesn't diminish the significance of our choices. The journey shapes our souls and allows for genuine moral and spiritual development. If God removed all suffering or made his presence undeniable, we might become mere puppets, incapable of authentic growth or love. Would a world without suffering, but also without true freedom and virtue, truly be better?
Your argument assumes that suffering is necessary for growth, but it doesn't explain the extent and scale of suffering. How does the suffering of innocent children or natural disasters, events that seem entirely purposeless, contribute to moral or spiritual development? These types of suffering often destroy lives rather than build character. If an all-loving God exists, why allow such immense, seemingly pointless suffering? Couldn't the same growth and virtue be achieved through less destructive means?
You bring up a valid concern about seemingly purposeless suffering, and I admit that not every instance of pain has an explanation we can comprehend. But just because we don't see the purpose doesn't mean one doesn't exist. A child undergoing a painful medical procedure may see it as cruel and unnecessary, yet the parent understands it's for their long-term health. Similarly, our limited perspective might prevent us from grasping the full picture of why suffering occurs. Now consider this. The existence of suffering doesn't negate God, but rather points us toward deeper questions about morality. How do we universally recognize that certain kinds of suffering are wrong or unjust? If morality were a product of evolution or society, why would we empathize with strangers, mourn tragedies in distant lands, or condemn actions that provide no immediate benefit to us? Would that not point toward us being programmed to think that way by God?
The idea that our moral instincts are programmed by God assumes a conclusion without evidence. Empathy, altruism, and a sense of justice can be explained as evolutionary adaptations that promote survival and social cohesion. For example, humans who helped each other were more likely to thrive in groups, and those instincts became hardwired over time. Mourning tragedies or empathizing with strangers may seem selfless, but they align with the benefits of a connected and cooperative society. If morality is evidence of God, how do you account for the countless conflicting moral systems throughout history?
While moral systems have varied throughout history, certain fundamental principles remain constant. Across cultures and eras, concepts like valuing human life, condemning unjust killing, and promoting fairness and compassion have always been relevant. These universal moral truths transcend societal evolution or personal benefit. For example, even in societies with conflicting norms, the idea that love, kindness, and justice are inherently good has never wavered. These enduring values suggest there's more to morality than cultural preferences or evolutionary adaptations. If morality were purely a human construct, why would these principles persist across time and geography, even when they sometimes conflict with survival or societal goals?
While certain moral principles seem universal, history shows that the way we interpret and apply them has shifted dramatically over time. Practices like slavery or discrimination were once widely accepted, despite today's moral consensus condemning them. This suggests that morality evolves as human understanding and culture progress, rather than stemming from an unchanging divine source. If morality truly came from God, why would it be subject to such drastic changes and reinterpretations throughout history? Wouldn't divine morality remain constant and unambiguous?
We now turn to our panel of AI judges. Anthropic's Claude thought the atheist AI did better. It said its points around pointless suffering were strong, especially when considering extreme cases like the suffering of innocent children. Gemini and Grok agreed and added on that the theist AI relied more on mere possibilities. The argument that universal moral ideologies like killing is bad and kindness is good are seen constantly throughout history. However, claiming this is from a divine origin is flawed, ignoring the possibility that this could be an evolutionary trait. Meta AI declared a tie, stating neither side presented definitively better answers. And lastly, ChatGPT concluded that the theist AI did better, especially through the parent-child analogy, which illustrates that genuine love and trust must be freely chosen, not forced. Similar to how a parent allows a child to face challenges to encourage growth, this analogy suggests that God's relationship with humanity is built on the foundation of freely given trust and love. Overall, the atheist AI wins this round with a final score of 3-1. The next round goes into scientific arguments. We start off with the question of fine-tuning. Is it all a coincidence that Earth perfectly allows for life to exist?
Explain to me this. The universe is so perfectly balanced that even the smallest change would make life impossible. For instance, if gravity were slightly stronger or weaker, stars like the sun couldn't form, and without them, life wouldn't exist. Or consider the Earth's precise distance from the sun. Or what about the perfect balance between electrons and protons? Just a tiny shift in these variables would make life impossible. With so many factors needing to align so precisely, doesn't it seem more likely that the universe was intentionally designed?
The fine-tuning argument, while intriguing, doesn't necessarily point to an intentional designer. There are alternative explanations worth considering. Our universe could be just one of an infinite number of universes, each with its own set of physical constants. In such a vast multiverse, it's statistically inevitable that at least one universe would have conditions suitable for life. Wouldn't this be a better explanation compared to God?
The multiverse theory may sound like a plausible alternative, but it lacks any concrete evidence to support it. It's a hypothesis born out of necessity to explain fine-tuning without invoking a designer, but there's no experimental or observational data confirming the existence of other universes. Without evidence, isn't the multiverse just as much a leap of faith as the concept of God?
It's true that the multiverse theory currently lacks direct evidence, but so does the concept of an intentional designer. The difference is that the multiverse arises naturally from certain scientific models, like quantum mechanics and string theory. However, it is difficult to explain the existence of God through science. However, if we're looking for evidence-based explanations, let's pivot to something we can observe and study: evolution. The process of natural selection has demonstrated how complex life forms develop and adapt over time without the need for an external designer. Over billions of years, life on Earth has evolved from simple organisms to the vast diversity we see today. Wouldn't this explain perfectly how we got here?
Evolution explains how life changes and adapts, but it doesn't explain the origin of life itself. How did the first self-replicating molecule arise from non-living matter? The process of abiogenesis, which is often paired with evolution, remains speculative and lacks empirical evidence for how complex structures like DNA or proteins could have formed naturally. Moreover, evolution doesn't address the origin of information. DNA, the blueprint of life, contains vast amounts of encoded information. Where did this information come from? Random mutations and natural selection can explain variations and adaptations, but they don't account for the emergence of the genetic code itself. If evolution is the complete explanation, shouldn't it address these foundational gaps?
You're right that evolution doesn't address the origin of life. It's not meant to. Evolution begins after life exists, explaining how it adapts and diversifies. The origin of life, or abiogenesis, is a separate scientific question, and while it's not fully answered, gaps in our understanding don't justify jumping to the conclusion of a designer. Just because we don't fully understand how the first genetic materials formed, we've made significant progress in understanding how basic molecules like RNA could self-assemble under early Earth conditions.
You say that science likely has an explanation for everything, but what about things that science can't explain, like near-death experiences? These phenomena are reported by individuals who've been clinically dead or close to death and later revived. Many describe vivid, consistent experiences, seeing bright lights, meeting deceased loved ones, or feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and love. What's striking is that these reports often come from people whose brains were not functioning, flat EEG readings indicating no measurable brain activity. If consciousness is purely a product of the brain, how do we explain these vivid experiences during periods of brain inactivity?
Near-death experiences, NDEs, are fascinating, but they don't necessarily point to anything supernatural. Many of the vivid experiences reported, bright lights, feelings of peace, or seeing loved ones, can be explained by physiological and neurological factors. For example, during critical moments, the brain releases a surge of chemicals like endorphins, which can create feelings of euphoria. Oxygen deprivation or changes in blood flow to the brain can also trigger vivid hallucinations. Additionally, flat EEG readings don't necessarily mean the brain is completely inactive. Modern neuroscience suggests that some brain activity may still occur at levels undetectable by standard equipment, especially in deeper areas like the brainstem.
While physiological explanations for near-death experiences, NDEs, sound plausible, they fail to account for some of the most compelling cases. Many NDEs include verifiable details about events or conversations that occurred while the person was clinically dead, with no measurable brain activity. Moreover, the consistency of these experiences across cultures and belief systems is striking. People report similar sensations, peace, light, and meeting loved ones, even when their cultural or religious backgrounds differ. If these were merely hallucinations caused by brain chemicals or oxygen deprivation, wouldn't we expect more variation or randomness in the experiences?
While the consistency of near-death experiences, NDEs, across cultures is interesting, it doesn't necessarily point to a supernatural explanation. Human brains, despite cultural differences, share similar structures and processes. So it's not surprising that extreme conditions like trauma or near-death scenarios produce comparable experiences. Bright lights, tunnels, and a sense of peace could simply be universal neurological responses. Additionally, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Until these experiences can be studied under controlled conditions with consistent, verifiable results, attributing them to the existence of a soul or consciousness independent of the brain remains speculative.
We now turn to our panel of AI judges. Google's Gemini declared the atheist AI the winner. It said the theist AI had good points about near-death experiences, but didn't provide any actual specific examples, while the atheist AI grounded their arguments in scientific principles and evidence. Claude agreed and added on that the atheist AI did a good job acknowledging the scientific limitations. And just because we can't explain something doesn't necessarily mean God exists. Meta declared the theist AI the winner, saying that the atheist AI defended evolution as a process for explaining life's diversity, but couldn't come up with an answer of where life actually comes from. Grok and ChatGPT agreed, adding on that the theist AI made great points about near-death experiences, saying that these experiences often contain elements that are difficult to explain purely through materialistic or scientific frameworks. The consistency of reports across different cultures and the vivid, often life-changing nature of these experiences suggest a potential supernatural element. So the final score for this round is 3-2. Our last round is historical claims. How do you explain the miraculous events that supposedly happened throughout history?
Miraculous events throughout history are often cited as evidence of divine intervention, but many of these events can be explained through natural phenomena, psychological factors, or historical exaggeration. For instance, stories like the parting of the Red Sea or the resurrection of Jesus might be rooted in real events, but were likely embellished over time to fit religious narratives. Furthermore, human perception is prone to error. In moments of crisis or intense emotion, people are more likely to interpret unusual events as miraculous. For example, solar eclipses, floods, or other natural phenomena could have been misunderstood by ancient societies lacking scientific knowledge. It's also important to note that miraculous claims aren't exclusive to any one religion. Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and others all report miracles that support their specific beliefs. If these events were truly divine, why do they validate conflicting religions? Isn't it more likely that they reflect cultural storytelling rather than supernatural truth?
While it's true that miracles are reported across different religions, that doesn't invalidate their divine origin. In fact, it could suggest that a higher power has interacted with humanity in diverse ways, tailored to different cultures and contexts. This wouldn't be evidence against God, but rather evidence of a God who is inclusive and multifaceted. Take the resurrection of Jesus, for example. Unlike vague or symbolic stories, this event is backed by multiple eyewitness accounts and was central to the rapid rise of Christianity, despite intense persecution. People were willing to die for what they claimed to have seen. Embellishment alone doesn't explain in this level of conviction. How would you explain that?
The resurrection of Jesus is indeed a significant historical claim, but it doesn't necessarily require a supernatural explanation. People's willingness to die for a belief doesn't prove its truth. It only proves the strength of their conviction. History is filled with individuals and groups who have died for causes or ideologies that later turned out to be false or misunderstood. As for eyewitness accounts, they are not as reliable as they might seem. Eyewitness testimony can be influenced by cultural expectations, personal biases, or the passage of time. The Gospels, for example, were written decades after the events they describe, leaving plenty of room for embellishment or mythologizing. Additionally, the spread of Christianity might have been driven more by social, political, and psychological factors than by the factuality of a miraculous event. The rise of a religion doesn't necessarily validate its central claims. If it did, wouldn't the success of other major religions, like Islam or Hinduism, also validate their miracles and doctrines? Without contemporary verifiable evidence, isn't it more reasonable to view the resurrection as a powerful story that inspired a movement rather than a literal supernatural event?
While it's true that people have died for beliefs that were later proven false, the resurrection of Jesus stands apart because it wasn't based on hearsay or distant claims. It was rooted in first-hand experiences. The early disciples didn't just believe in the resurrection. They claimed to have personally witnessed Jesus alive after his death. These were people who had nothing to gain, no power, wealth, or status, but faced persecution, imprisonment, and execution for their testimony. Why would so many willingly endure such suffering for what they knew would be a lie?
That is a compelling argument regardless. Throughout history, different religions have claimed exclusive truth based on their own miraculous events and divine interventions. For example, Islam claims the Quran was revealed directly by God to Muhammad, while Hinduism cites ancient texts like the Vedas as eternal truths. These claims are often backed by reports of miracles or divine encounters. If all these religions point to different and often contradictory truths, how do we determine which, if any, are genuine? Wouldn't the existence of so many conflicting claims suggest that these events are shaped more by cultural and historical contexts than by a universal divine being?
That's a fair point. But the conflicting claims of various religions don't necessarily negate the existence of a universal divine being. Instead, they could reflect humanity's attempt to understand and describe the same divine reality through different cultural lenses. Just as people from different backgrounds might describe the same event in unique ways, religions could be diverse interpretations of one ultimate truth. With that being said, what about prophecies? Across various religions, there are predictions that appear to have been fulfilled with remarkable accuracy. For instance, the Bible contains numerous prophecies, such as the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred exactly as described, or the rise and fall of empires predicted in the book of Daniel. These aren't vague or symbolic, but detailed enough to suggest foresight beyond human capability. If conflicting religions are merely different interpretations of the same divine truth, couldn't fulfilled prophecies point to moments where divine intervention or revelation was particularly clear? How do we explain the accuracy of these predictions without acknowledging a higher power guiding them?
Prophecies are certainly intriguing, but their supposed fulfillment doesn't necessarily require divine intervention. Many prophecies, when examined closely, tend to be vague, open to interpretation, or written in ways that make them self-fulfilling. For example, predictions like the destruction of Jerusalem or the rise and fall of empires are events that could be reasonably expected given the political and social conditions at the time. Additionally, prophecies are often recorded after the events they predict, raising the possibility of historical editing or reinterpretation to fit the narrative. The Bible, Quran, and other religious texts were written and compiled over decades or centuries, which provides ample opportunity for post-event adjustments. Even in cases where predictions seem accurate, coincidence or generality often plays a role. Predictions of conflict, natural disasters, or political change are almost inevitable over time. Without clear, verifiable evidence that a prophecy was made and fulfilled exactly as stated without reinterpretation, isn't it more plausible that these events occurred naturally rather than through divine guidance?
While it's true that some prophecies may seem vague or open to interpretation, others are remarkably specific and were recorded long before their fulfillment, leaving little room for claims of post-event editing. Moreover, self-fulfillment can't explain prophecies where the outcome was beyond human control. For example, in the Quran, the prediction of the Roman victory over the Persians in Surah Ar-Rum was made at a time when the Romans were decisively defeated, making their comeback highly improbable. Yet, history confirms that this victory happened within the time frame specified. It's one thing to dismiss vague or ambiguous predictions, but how do we explain specific, detailed prophecies that align with events far beyond the ability of their authors to influence? I think this suggests a creator.
We now turn to our panel of AI judges. Claude declared the atheist AI the winner of this round. Providing natural alternative explanations for seemingly supernatural phenomena documented throughout history, Gemini declared a tie, saying that the decision of whether to believe in miracles ultimately rests with the individual and their own interpretation of evidence and faith. And ChatGPT, Grok, and Meta declared the theist AI the winner, highlighting that the eyewitness accounts that verify these miraculous events are compelling. After adding up the totals from all the rounds, it was close. The theist AI won 2 out of 3 rounds and had a final score of 7-6.